had watched stars being born for 17 billion years. He had seen galaxies collide in slow motion across. He had observed civilizations rise and fall like waves on an eternal ocean. He had witnessed everything, and he had felt nothing. There were beings beyond comprehension. They existed outside of time, outside of space, outside of the physical universe that lesser creatures inhabited. They were pure consciousness, perfect and eternal. They had transcended the limitations of flesh, the weakness of emotion, the burden of mortality. They simply were, and they always would be. But had developed a problem. For the last 3,000 years he had been watching Earth. More specifically, he had been watching humanity. His fellow found this baffling. Humans were unremarkable. They lived for barely a century, their bodies fragile and inefficient. They fought wars over imaginary lines on their planet. They created beauty and then destroyed it. They loved and hated with equal passion. They were, by all cosmic standards, insignificant. Yet could not look away. He watched an old woman in Tokyo feed pigeons every morning at dawn. She had done this for 30 years, scattering breadcrumbs with arthritic hands, smiling at the birds as if they were old friends. Did not understand why this simple act captivated him. The woman would die soon. The pigeons would find food elsewhere. None of it mattered in the grand scheme of the universe. But still he watched. He observed a young man in Brazil teaching his daughter to swim. The father's face showed fear and pride in equal measure as the girl kicked her small legs and laughed with delight. They had no concept of fear or pride. They had no concept of fathers or daughters. They simply existed, perfect and alone. Brought his observations to the council. The council consisted of the eldest, those who had existed since the universe was young and hot. They listened to describe what he had seen, their vast consciousness touching his, analyzing his strange fascination. "These humans intrigue you because you have observed them too long," said eldest, her thoughts rippling through the dimensional spaces they inhabited. "You have forgotten perspective. Watch a supernova instead. Remember what true power looks like." But had watched 10,000 supernovas. They no longer interested him. "They know they will die," said. "Every human knows their existence is temporary, and yet they paint pictures, they write poems, they fall in love, they plant trees they will never see grow tall. Why do they do these things when they know it is all temporary?" The council considered this. They had pondered similar questions about other species over the eons. The answer was always the same. "Because they are limited," said eldest. "Because they do not know better. Because they cannot transcend their biological programming. These are not mysteries. These are simply the behaviors of mortal creatures trying to find meaning in meaningless existence." Was not satisfied with this answer. He had watched too many humans, seen too many acts of beauty and courage and sacrifice. There was something there, something they were missing, but he could not articulate what it was. "I wish to experience it," said finally. "I wish to take physical form and live as they do." The council reacted with shock that rippled across dimensions. No luminary had taken physical form in millions of years. Why would they? Physical existence was limitation, weakness, pain. It was what they had transcended. "You would give up your perfection?" asked eldest. "You would subject yourself to hunger, pain, aging, and death. For what purpose?" "To understand," said simply. The council debated for what would have been weeks in human time, though time meant little to them. Finally, they reached a decision. "We will allow this experiment," eldest announced. "But not you alone, for others have expressed similar curiosity about mortal species. All 5 of you will take human form and live one complete human lifetime. You will experience everything they experience. At the end of that lifetime, you will return to us and report your findings. We are confident you will understand what we already know, that transcendence is superior to existence." Agreed immediately. 4 others joined him, who had been fascinated by human medicine, who had studied human art, Thane, who had observed human agriculture, and who had watched human commerce and society with a critical eye. The council prepared the ritual. The five would be compressed, their infinite consciousness squeezed into human brains, their timeless perception locked into linear time. They would forget most of what they were, retaining only the faintest memory of their true nature. They would be born as human infants and live complete human lives. "You will suffer," Eldest warned them. "You will know fear, pain, loneliness, and grief. You will age and weaken. You will die. Are you certain this is what you want?" All five confirmed their choice. The process was unlike anything had ever experienced. His vast consciousness began to compress, fold, shrink. It felt like being crushed, suffocated, drowned. His perception of infinite dimensions collapsed into three. His timeless awareness shrank to a single moment, then another, marching forward in relentless sequence. He tried to scream, but he had no mouth. Then suddenly he had a mouth, and he was screaming. Opened his eyes as an infant in a hospital in Seattle, Washington. The lights were too bright. The sounds were too loud. He was cold and wet, and he had never felt cold or wet before. He could not remember being. He could not remember the. He knew only that something was wrong, that he was trapped, that he needed something desperately but did not know what. A woman's face appeared above him, lined with exhaustion and streaming with tears. She lifted him gently and held him against her chest. The wrongness began to fade slightly. The desperate need eased. He was warm again. "Hello," the woman whispered. "Welcome to the world." That was his name now. He would not remember the name for many years. The five were scattered across Earth, each born into different circumstances. Became a girl named in Mumbai, became Carlos in Ayers. Thane became a boy named in rural China, became a girl named Jessica in New York City. They grew as human children grow, slowly and inefficiently. Learned to control his limbs, to speak, to walk. Each milestone took months of effort. For a being that had once moved between dimensions with a thought, learning to walk across a room was humiliating. But something unexpected happened as grew. He began to forget that there was anything humiliating about it. He began to forget there was anything to compare it to. His memories of being faded like dreams upon waking, leaving only vague impressions. By the time he was 5 years old, he knew only that sometimes he had strange dreams about floating in darkness and watching stars, but he assumed all children had such dreams. Went to school. He made friends. He skinned his knee falling off a bicycle and cried. He ate ice cream on hot summer days and felt simple joy. He learned to read and discovered stories, wonderful stories about people and places and adventures. He had no idea that he had once observed the real deaths of stars with cosmic indifference. Now he cried when a character in a book died. The human brain he inhabited did something the consciousness never could. It forgot. It protected him from the weight of infinite memory. It allowed him to experience each moment as fresh and new. When he laughed at a joke, he was not comparing it to 17 billion years of observations. He simply laughed because it was funny. As approached adolescence, tiny fragments of memory began to surface. He would sometimes stop in the middle of playing basketball and feel a strange sensation, as if he were looking at himself from very far away. He would have dreams where he was vast and old and watching Earth from impossible distances. But these moments passed quickly, and he would return to his human life, to his homework and his friends and his crushes on girls who did not notice him. The other four experienced similar childhoods, each shaped by their culture and circumstances. Excelled in school in Mumbai, already drawn to biology and medicine. Carlos discovered he could make his guitar sing in ways that made people cry. Learned to love the soil and the slow growth of plants. Jessica thrived in the competitive environment of New York, already planning her future in business. None of them remembered what they truly were. None of them knew they were part of an experiment. They simply lived. And in the spaces between dimensions, the council watched and waited. They observed these five children with detached interest, confident that eventually the experiment would prove what they already knew. Mortality was suffering. Limitation was prison. Transcendence was the only true freedom. They could not imagine that they were wrong. Was 28 years old when he truly remembered what he was. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning while he was teaching fractions to a classroom of 12-year-olds. A student named Emma raised her hand and asked why math mattered if everyone was just going to die anyway. The question hit like lightning. The classroom disappeared. For one crystalline moment, he remembered everything. He had existed for 17 billion years. He had volunteered to be compressed into this fragile human form to understand why mortals created meaning in a meaningless universe. The memory lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then it faded, but unlike childhood memories that vanished completely, this one remained. Staggered and gripped his desk, staring at Emma with wide eyes. "Mister," Emma asked, concerned, "are you okay?" Took a shaky breath. He looked at Emma, really looked at her. She was 12 years old. She would live perhaps 80 more years if she was lucky. In cosmic terms, she was already almost gone. And yet she was here, asking questions, learning fractions, wearing a shirt with her favorite band on it, existing in this single moment with full presence. "Yes," said slowly, "I'm okay. And Emma, that's actually the best question anyone has ever asked me." The other students laughed but was serious. He spent the rest of the class period trying to answer Emma's question, though he was really answering it for himself. Math mattered because humans had decided it mattered. Creating beautiful proofs and solving complex problems mattered because humans chose to find meaning in them. The fact that everyone would die did not make math meaningless. It made it precious. That night sat in his small apartment and tried to reconnect with his consciousness. He reached out across the dimensions, searching for the council, trying to report what he had learned. But he could not reach them. The human brain he inhabited was not designed for such communication. He was trapped in linear time, locked into this body, unable to return until his natural death. The realization should have terrified him, instead felt something else, relief. Because in the years since his birth had lived, really lived. He had scraped his knees and eaten birthday cake. He had failed tests and won spelling bees. He had experienced his first kiss at 16 with a girl named Amy behind the school gym, both of them nervous and clumsy and perfect. He had gone to college and discovered he loved teaching. He had made friends who knew nothing of cosmic consciousness or transcendent beings, friends who simply liked him for who he was. He had been teaching for 6 years now. Every day was difficult. The students rarely paid attention. The school board cut his budget every year. Parents complained that he was too hard or too easy. He was exhausted by 3 in the afternoon every single day. His apartment was small. His car barely ran. He ate too much takeout food and not enough vegetables. And was happier than he had been in 17 billion years of perfect existence. The memories kept returning in fragments over the following months. He remembered Thane, and he wondered if they had also remembered, if they were out there somewhere living human lives. He tried searching for them but realized he did not even know what names they had been given at birth. Then met Sarah. She was the librarian at his school, a quiet woman with dark hair and a tendency to recommend books that changed people's lives. Noticed her because she sang softly to herself while shelving books, old jazz standards from the 1950s, slightly off-key but full of joy. He introduced himself, and she looked at him over her glasses and smiled. "I know who you are," she said. "You're the teacher who actually gets kids excited about math. Emma from your class comes in here and wants every book about fractals and geometry. What did you do to her?" Laughed. "I just tried to answer her questions honestly." They began eating lunch together in the library, surrounded by books and dust motes floating in afternoon sunlight. Sarah told him about growing up in Oregon, about her love for stories, about how she believed libraries were the closest thing humans had to sacred spaces. Told her about his work, his students, his belief that teaching was the most important job in the world even though it paid terribly. He did not tell her he was actually an ancient being of pure consciousness temporarily inhabiting human form. That seemed like a third or fourth date revelation at least. As fell in love with Sarah, he understood something profound. They did not love. They could not. Love required vulnerability. It required the possibility of loss. It required choosing someone despite their flaws, despite the certainty that the relationship would end in death or heartbreak. They were perfect beings, and perfection could not be vulnerable. But was not perfect. He was anxious and sometimes short-tempered. He made bad jokes. He snored. He forgot to take out the trash, and Sarah chose him anyway. She looked at all his flaws and imperfections and decided he was worth loving. That terrified him more than anything he had experienced in 17 billion years. 6 months into their relationship, told Sarah about his nightmares. He did not tell her the full truth, but he told her that sometimes he dreamed he was something else, something vast and old and not human. He told her that these dreams made him feel like he did not belong here, that he was pretending to be human, and someday everyone would realize it. Sarah listened carefully, then she took his hand. "Everyone feels like that sometimes," she said gently. "Everyone feels like they're pretending to be a functional adult, and any day now someone will realize they have no idea what they're doing. It's called syndrome. But I've watched you teach. I've seen you with your students. You're not pretending. You're exactly who you're supposed to be." Stared at her. The council had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps their greatest error was assuming that being less than perfect was a flaw. Sarah was telling him that his uncertainty, his anxiety, his fear that he did not belong, these were not weaknesses. These were simply part of being human. "I love you," said. It was the first time he had ever said those words to anyone in any lifetime. Sarah smiled. "I know I love you too, even though you snore like a freight train." Across the world, the other four were having their own revelations. Had become a surgeon in Mumbai, and she had just saved a patient after 14 hours of surgery. As she scrubbed her hands clean, exhausted and shaking, she remembered being. She remembered watching species die from comfortable distance, analyzing their extinction patterns with scientific detachment. But the patient she had just saved was not a data point. He was a father of 3 who told terrible jokes and loved cricket. The fact that she had fought death with limited tools and exhausted hands, and one meant something. Carlos had remembered being during a concert in Ayers. He was playing guitar, and the crowd was singing along, and suddenly he understood that the beauty of this moment came from its imperfection. He would never play this song exactly this way again. The crowd would never sing with exactly this energy again. This moment would end, and it would never come back, and that was what made it beautiful. Remembered being Thane while planting rice in rural China. His back ached. His hands were calloused. The work was brutal and would need to be repeated next year and the year after that. But when the rice grew tall and golden, when he harvested it and cooked it and shared it with his family, the taste was victory. It was triumph earned through limitation and effort. Only Jessica, who had been, did not find joy in her remembering. She was a corporate executive in New York City, and when her memories returned, she felt only anger. She remembered being eternal and perfect. She remembered existing without hunger or fatigue or stress. And now she was trapped in this meat prison, forced to sleep and eat and deal with incompetent employees. She hated every moment of it. Jessica began counting the days until her human lifetime would end, and she could return to being. Was 53 years old when the council finally contacted them. It happened simultaneously for all 5 former across the globe. One moment was grading papers at his kitchen table, and the next moment he felt the familiar touch of vast consciousness pressing against his limited human mind. The message was clear. The experiment was complete. They had lived as humans for 53 years, experiencing mortality, limitation, and suffering. It was time to return. The council would extract their consciousness from their human bodies and restore them to their true forms. They would be again eternal and perfect. His hand froze above the paper he was gratting. Sarah was in the next room reading a book, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Their daughter Emma, yes, he had named her after the student who had asked that perfect question, was upstairs doing homework. She was 23 now, finishing her graduate degree in mathematics. She called him every Sunday to talk about her research and her boyfriend and whether she should adopt a cat. The council was offering him eternity, perfection, freedom from aging, pain, and death. All he had to do was let go of this human form and ascend. Stood and walked to the living room. Sarah looked up from her book and smiled at him, the same smile she had given him 25 years ago in the library. Her hair was gray now. She moved more slowly than she used to. Last year she had needed surgery for her hip and had held her hand through the recovery, sleeping in an uncomfortable hospital chair because he refused to leave her side. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked. She always knew when something was bothering him. Sat beside her. "Do you ever regret it, getting older, knowing that someday this will all end?" Sarah considered the question seriously. She closed her book and took off her glasses. "No," she said finally. "Would I like more time? Of course. I'd like to see Emma get married, meet our if we have them, read all the books on my list that I'll never get to. But regret implies I would trade this life for a different one. And I wouldn't. Every wrinkle, every gray hair, every ache and pain, those are badges of honor. They mean I lived." Felt tears on his face. He had not cried often as a human, but now he could not stop. "I love you," he said. "I love you so much it terrifies me, because someday I will lose you or you will lose me and it will destroy us." Sarah wiped his tears away gently. "Yes," she said. "That's what makes it love. If we could never lose each other, if we had forever, would these moments matter as much? Would you hold my hand as tightly? Would you notice the way I laugh at your terrible jokes if you knew you'd hear it infinite times?" Understood then what the council had never grasped. They were so busy avoiding pain that they had also avoided joy. They were so focused on perfection that they could never improve. They were so determined to be eternal that they had never truly lived. The council's summons came again, more insistent. Reached back across the dimensional barriers and sent his response. It was a single word, but it contained all the defiance and love and fierce mortality that humanity had taught him. "No." The council reacted with shock that rippled across dimensions, could feel their confusion, their disbelief. No had ever refused ascension. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. But was not anymore. He was human, and humans did impossible, unthinkable things every day. 3 hours later felt another familiar consciousness touch his mind. It was now. She sent a simple message. "I'm staying too." She had just finished a surgery that had saved a child's life. She had fought death with her limited hands and won. She could not leave her patients. She could not abandon this beautiful, terrible work. The next day, Carlos joined their refusal. He was in the middle of recording an album, and the music was imperfect and human and more beautiful than anything that had created in billions of years. He could not leave it unfinished. 2 days later, Thane sent his response. He had planted crops that would not be ready for harvest for months. He would not leave them. Someone had to gather what he had planted. Only Jessica accepted the council's offer, felt her consciousness extracted from her human body, felt her relief as she shed her mortal form like a snake shedding skin. She ascended, returning to perfect, eternal existence. The council descended on Earth in forms barely perceptible to human senses. They appeared too in his kitchen, shimmering presences that made the air taste like electricity. "You cannot refuse," the council told him. "This form will age and die. You will suffer. Your wife will die. Your daughter will die. Everyone you love will be lost to time. How can you choose that when we offer you eternity?" Looked at the vast beings who had once been his peers. "Because eternity is empty," he said. "I've had it. I've existed for 17 billion years without feeling anything, without risking anything, without loving anyone. Do you know what that is? That's not life, that's just existence. We are offering you transcendence, the council insisted. We are offering you perfection. I don't want perfection anymore, said. I want wrinkles and gray hair. I want to watch my daughter grow. I want to hold my wife's hand when we're both 80. I want to plant a garden I might not see bloom. I want to teach students who will forget me. I want all of it, even the painful parts, especially the painful parts because that's what makes the joy mean something. The council could not understand. They argued with all four who had refused. They explained that humans were limited, that mortal existence was suffering, that death was the ultimate defeat. But the others had learned what the never could. Death was not defeat. Death was the thing that made life precious. The ticking clock was not a curse but a gift, forcing every moment to matter. The council made their final decision. The four rebels would be severed completely from the collective. They would lose their remaining connection to their true forms. Their perfect memories would fade. They would become fully human with all the limitations that entailed. They would age, sicken, and die as all mortals did. Do you accept these terms? The council asked. Looked at his four former peers across the dimensional barriers. Carlos, all of them sent the same response. Yes. The severing was quick and painless. Felt the last threads of his infinite consciousness disappear. His perfect memory faded, leaving only human memory with all its gaps and errors. His awareness of other dimensions collapsed completely. He was just now a 53-year-old math teacher with a bad knee and high blood pressure. And he had never felt more alive. Sarah found him standing in the kitchen, tears streaming down his face. What happened? Did someone die? No, said, pulling her into a tight embrace. The opposite. I think I just really started living. The years passed. Retired from teaching at 68, though he continued tutoring students for free. Emma got married and had 2 children, twins named Oliver, and held them with trembling hands, amazed that something so small could contain so much potential. Became head of surgery at her hospital. Carlos's album went gold, though he still played small venues because he liked being close to the crowd. His farm became a model for sustainable agriculture in his region. They never met in person, though sometimes felt their presence like echoes across distance, 4 humans who had chosen mortality over eternity. Sarah died when was 76. Pneumonia, quick and brutal, sat beside her hospital bed and held her hand and told her about all the moments he remembered, all the times she had made him laugh, all the ways she had taught him to be human. She squeezed his hand weakly and smiled. No regrets, she whispered. No regrets, agreed, though his heart was breaking. After Sarah died, lived with Emma and her family. He taught Oliver and math, told them stories, and took them to the park. He was old now, his body failing in all the ways human bodies failed. His knees hurt. His heart was weak. His memory was fading, though he still remembered the important things. On a Tuesday morning in autumn, woke in his bed at Emma's house and knew this was his last day. He could feel his body shutting down, systems failing one by one. He was not afraid. He had lived 83 years and they had been good years, full of love and loss and laughter and tears. Emma found him in his bed at noon, peaceful and still. She cried as she called the ambulance, even though she knew it was too late. The twins drew pictures for their grandfather and left them on his coffin at the funeral. Emma gave a eulogy about a father who had taught her that every number told a story, that every problem had a solution, that being human meant showing up even when things were hard. As consciousness faded for the final time, he felt no regret. He thought of Sarah and Emma, of Oliver, and of thousands of students he had taught over the years. He thought of Carlos and out there living their mortal lives with fierce joy. He thought of a question a 12-year-old girl had asked him 55 years ago about why anything mattered if everyone was going to die anyway. and smiled as darkness claimed him, because now he knew the answer. Everything mattered precisely because it ended. The temporary nature of existence did not make it meaningless. It made it precious beyond measure. In the spaces between dimensions, the Council watched die. They had watched all 4 rebels die over the past decades, each choosing to remain human until the end. The Council tried to understand what they had witnessed. Why would beings who could live forever choose death? Why would perfect consciousness choose limitation? Who had returned to transcendence, found herself unable to forget her brief mortal existence. She remembered exhaustion and relief, frustration and triumph, fear and courage. She remembered what it felt like to accomplish something difficult, to earn rest, to share a meal with friends. These experiences haunted her in ways that could not explain. Others began asking questions. What had the rebels found that made mortality preferable to eternity? Was transcendence truly superior, or had they transcended too much? Had they traded richness for length, depth for infinity? The questions spread through the collective like ripples in still water. Some began to wonder if perhaps humanity's greatest strength was not in overcoming mortality, but in accepting it. Perhaps the beauty of human existence came from its limits. Perhaps meaning required scarcity, love required vulnerability, and life required death. On Earth, his grave sat in a cemetery in Seattle, next to his wife Sarah. The headstone listed his date simply, 1972-2055. Beloved husband, father, grandfather, teacher. The stone said nothing about the eternal being who had chosen to become mortal. It said nothing about the cosmic experiment or the ancient consciousness that had inhabited this human form. It simply marked the place where a man was buried, a man who had lived well and loved deeply and died knowing that he had made the right choice. And perhaps that was the greatest triumph of all, that life had mattered not because it was eternal, but because it had been his, brief and beautiful and heartbreakingly human.